Hello, welcome to my channel. Before we start, it's a good idea to get into bed and relax. I would also like to ask you to subscribe to my channel, like it, and write in the comments where you are from and what time it is. Thank you. Have a nice viewing. Step back in time to the rolling green hills and misty villages of medieval England. In this story, you will walk in the worn shoes of a serf, a peasant bound to the land, living under the watchful eyes of the lord of the manor. From the first light of dawn, when the rooster's crow pierces the early morning fog, to the quiet moments before the candle flickers out at night, you will experience the rhythm, the labor, and the small joys that mark a day in the life of someone whose life is both humble and harsh. This story will carry you through the simple yet demanding routines of plowing the fields, tending to livestock, repairing the thatched cottages, and observing the tiny celebrations and comforts that make life bearable. You will witness the relationships among the villagers, the hierarchical tension with the lord and his steward, and the enduring connection to the land that sustains them. Each scene is crafted to immerse you in the sights, sounds, and scents of medieval life, the earthy aroma of tilled soil, the sharp clatter of hooves on the cobbled lane, the smoke curling from a cooking hearth. As you read, you will see not just the work, but also the humanity, the laughter shared over a meager meal, the quiet resilience in the face of hardship, and the fleeting moments of wonder that even the most constrained life can hold. This is a story of survival, of duty, and of the ordinary courage that defines the lives of those often overlooked by history. Prepare yourself for an intimate journey into a day of toil and tradition, where every sunrise brings the same burdens and every sunset offers a fleeting reward, and where the world is both vast and constrained, harsh yet surprisingly alive. Welcome to a day in the life of a medieval serf. The first pale light of dawn seeped through the narrow gaps in the wooden shutters, casting long, thin lines across the earthen floor of the small cottage. Thomas, a young serf, stirred beneath the coarse wool blanket, his body stiff from yesterday's labors in the fields. Outside, the rooster crowed insistently, and the faint scent of damp soil carried through the open door, mingling with the smoke of the dying embers in the hearth. He rose slowly, feet brushing against the cold, uneven floor, and stretched, feeling the pull in his back and legs. The morning was quiet except for distant sounds of the village waking, the clatter of buckets, the lowing of cattle, and the hurried chatter of neighbors already beginning their day. Each sound was familiar, comforting in its regularity, as though it stitched the village into a single, living organism. Thomas moved to the corner of the cottage where a small wooden stool sat beside a clay basin. He splashed water on his face from the morning's cold draw, shivering at the shock. Life as a serf was unyielding, but moments like this, brief, personal rituals, provided a sense of small independence. Soon, though, the weight of duties would reclaim him, pulling him out to the fields under the Lord's command. He dressed in the rough, homespun tunic that had seen years of use, fastening it tightly around his waist with a thin leather belt. His boots, patched repeatedly, were stiff but reliable. Today's labor would be no different from yesterday's, the plowing of stubborn soil, tending to crops, and ensuring the livestock were fed. Yet, in the morning light, even this repetitive toil seemed to promise quiet satisfaction. Stepping outside, Thomas inhaled the cool morning air. Mist clung to the edges of the fields, curling around the thatched roofs of the cottages. The manor's silhouette loomed in the distance, a constant reminder of authority, wealth, and control. The steward would soon appear to assign tasks, and Thomas knew there would be no room for complaint. Still, he walked with careful attention to each step, mindful of the uneven ground and the small stones hidden in the grass. Nearby, his fellow serfs had begun their own routines. Mary, the older woman who lived 2 cottages down, carried a basket filled with water from the well. Her daughter gathered eggs from the chicken coop, while the smith's apprentice struck metal against metal in the yard, sparks flying in the cool air. Each figure moved in rhythm with the day, part of the larger dance dictated by the needs of the manor and the land. Thomas joined the line of men heading to the fields, the wooden plow strapped to his shoulder feeling heavier than it had the previous day. The soil was damp from overnight dew, and he could smell the richness of earth ready to be turned. Work would be long, and the sun's rise promised heat that would turn sweat into a second skin. Yet he walked steadily, counting steps and breaths, preparing himself for the physical rhythm that had become second nature. By the time he reached the fields, the sun had climbed higher, breaking through the mist in thin beams. The rows of crops stretched before him, neat but demanding, a responsibility that weighed on every serf. He lowered the plow into the earth, the blade biting into the soil with a resistance that tested his strength. Hands and shoulders strained as he moved forward, each step leaving a furrow in the fertile ground, a testament to his labor and endurance. Occasionally, he paused to wipe his brow, drinking from the waterskin slung across his shoulder. The air was thick with the scent of wet soil and the faint aroma of herbs growing at the field edges. Around him, other men worked in similar motions, synchronized by experience and necessity rather than instruction. There was an unspoken understanding among them, a shared knowledge of hardship, fatigue, and the small satisfactions found in completing one's share of the work. By mid-morning, the labor had taken its toll. Thomas's back ached, and his hands bore the redness of friction against the plow handle. Yet, there was a quiet beauty in the scene. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant hum of village life, the way sunlight danced across the tips of tall grass. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to appreciate it, before resuming the unceasing rhythm of the day, each furrow a small victory against the relentlessness of the land. The sun climbed steadily overhead, casting its warmth over the fields and drying the morning dew. Thomas paused briefly to stretch his aching back, feeling the tightness in his shoulders loosen slightly. The earth beneath his boots had softened under the morning labor, leaving footprints that marked the progress of his work. Around him, the rhythmic sound of plows digging into soil and oxen moving steadily created a quiet symphony of rural toil. He noticed the glimmer of sweat on his fellow workers' foreheads, their faces flushed but determined. Each man moved in silent coordination, aware of the importance of completing the work before the sun reached its peak. Thomas admired their endurance. Even after countless seasons of similar labor, there remained a stubborn vitality that refused to yield to fatigue. It was a resilience born of necessity, a shared strength woven into the very fabric of village life. By mid-morning, the steward appeared, striding along the field edge with an air of authority. His cloak, heavy and finely embroidered, seemed almost alien against the plain earth and simple garments of the serfs. He inspected the rows of crops, nodding occasionally and murmuring instructions. Thomas lowered his plow, acknowledging the presence of the overseer with a respectful bow of the head, mindful of the consequences of negligence. After several more hours of strenuous labor, the group paused for a brief midday meal. Thomas settled on the grass beside the furrows, unpacking a small loaf of coarse bread and a chunk of hard cheese wrapped in cloth. Conversation was minimal, interrupted by the occasional laughter of a neighbor or the distant barking of a farm dog. Despite the simplicity, there was comfort in this routine pause, a momentary reprieve from the unrelenting demands of labor. Once refreshed, Thomas turned to the afternoon chores. The plowing was done, but the land still demanded attention. Weeding, repairing fences, and tending to the small orchard near the edge of the field required meticulous care. Each task, though repetitive, carried significance. Neglected work could affect the yield, and a poor harvest could mean hardship for the entire village. The sense of responsibility weighed heavily, yet it also instilled a quiet pride in the completion of duties. Later, Thomas approached the village green, where the livestock were gathered for midday grazing. Cows lowed lazily, pigs snuffled through the earth, and chickens pecked at scattered grains. He moved among them with practiced ease, checking for signs of illness or injury. One of the cows limped slightly, and Thomas guided it gently toward the barn, murmuring reassurance as he inspected the hoof. These moments demanded patience and attentiveness, skills honed through years of necessity. Nearby, women were tending communal gardens, their hands buried in soil as they nurtured herbs, vegetables, and small fruit bushes. Mary, the elder neighbor, offered Thomas a brief nod, and he responded with a tired smile. Life here was structured around shared effort, each villager contributing to the welfare of the whole. There was an unspoken understanding that survival depended not solely on individual toil, but on cooperation and vigilance. The afternoon sun began its descent, painting the sky with golden hues. Thomas returned to the fields to finish the remaining tasks, repairing a broken fence with the help of another serf, hammering the wooden stakes into the ground. He felt the familiar rhythm of work, each strike deliberate and steady. Even in such mundane labor, there was a sense of accomplishment, a tangible outcome that connected effort to result in a way that few other aspects of life could. As shadows lengthened across the village, Thomas guided the last of the livestock back to the barn. The animals moved obediently, sensing the end of the day, their lowing and snuffling blending with the calls of villagers winding down their own work. Thomas's body ached, muscles screaming from exertion, yet there was a quiet satisfaction in seeing the animals safely housed, knowing that tomorrow they would be ready to sustain both the manor and the village. Evening brought a brief period of calm. Villagers gathered near the communal well to wash hands and fetch water for supper. Children played quietly in the fading light, their laughter a gentle contrast to the harshness of daily toil. Thomas paused to watch them, recalling his own childhood and the fleeting innocence that had once seemed endless. The day's labor had been exhausting, yet in these small, peaceful moments, the hardships seemed slightly less oppressive. By nightfall, the village cottages glowed softly with the flicker of hearth fires. Thomas returned to his own home, removing boots caked with mud and hanging tools by the door. He settled onto the rough wooden stool by the hearth, soaking his aching feet in warm water. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of cooking stew, and the low murmur of neighbors speaking quietly through thin walls reached his ears. There was comfort in the consistency of these sounds, a reminder that life, despite its hardships, continued with a familiar rhythm. The day had been long and demanding, yet it was far from over. As Thomas ate his simple evening meal, he reflected on the tasks completed and those awaiting him tomorrow. The manor, the fields, the animals, and the people formed an unbroken chain of responsibility. Each link depended on the diligence of every villager. There was no room for complaint, only acceptance and a steady determination to endure. The sun had dipped below the distant hills, leaving the sky painted in shades of crimson and deep violet. Thomas returned to his cottage, his hands rough and calloused, his body weary from a full day of toil. The scent of cooking stew welcomed him, curling from the hearth and mingling with the earthy aroma of dried herbs hanging from the beams. Each familiar smell was a small comfort, signaling the arrival of evening. Inside, his small home seemed alive with warmth despite its modesty. The hearth fire crackled, casting flickering shadows against the rough walls. Thomas's wife, Eleanor, moved with practiced efficiency, stirring the pot and arranging the simple ingredients they had gathered. The children, tired from their day in the village and fields, played quietly on the floor with wooden toys, their laughter soft and intermittent. Thomas sat on the worn wooden bench, removing his boots and rubbing his sore feet. The day's aches pressed into his muscles like a dull reminder of labor's weight. Yet, as he breathed in the fragrant smoke and listened to the low murmur of his family, he felt a momentary release from the burdens of the manor. Here, in this small space, the pressures of servitude softened, if only for a brief time. Eleanor handed him a wooden bowl filled with thick stew and a piece of coarse bread. They ate together in near silence, the conversation minimal but comforting. In these moments, communication was more than words. It was shared presence, the simple act of sitting together, sustaining each other after a day that demanded so much. Thomas allowed himself a small smile at the children's antics, a reminder of life beyond labor. After the meal, Thomas stepped outside briefly to take in the evening air. The village was quieting, the last sounds of animals settling into barns blending with the distant call of an owl. Moonlight shimmered across the dew-laden grass, illuminating the path that led back to the fields he had tended. Even in the calm, there was a persistent awareness of duty. Tomorrow would come with the same demands, and he must be ready to rise with the dawn. Inside, he helped the children wash their hands in a basin of cool water, guiding them with gentle patience. Eleanor reminded them of prayers whispered softly before bed, traditions passed down through generations. The small ritual connected them to something larger than themselves, a spiritual rhythm complementing the physical one dictated by the manor. Thomas observed, a sense of quiet pride swelling in his chest. With the children tucked into their straw-stuffed mattresses, Thomas and Eleanor shared a moment near the hearth. The flickering light danced across their faces, revealing lines of fatigue and endurance earned through unending labor. They spoke of little things, the health of the livestock, the weather, and news of neighbors. Words were sparse, but the conversation carried warmth, a reminder that human connection could endure even the harshest routines. As the night deepened, Thomas checked on the animals one last time. The cows huddled in the barn, the pigs rested quietly in their pen, and the chickens nestled on their perches. Ensuring their well-being was a sacred duty. Neglect meant hardship, both immediate and long-term. The act of tending to these creatures brought a sense of accomplishment and responsibility, a connection to the life-sustaining cycles of the land he could not escape. Returning to the cottage, Thomas prepared for sleep. He stoked the fire gently, ensuring it would not die out entirely, and laid out the rough wool blanket for himself. The day's exhaustion weighed heavily, each muscle protesting the prolonged hours of labor. Yet, in the fatigue, there was also a sense of fulfillment. Work had been completed, responsibilities met, and life, though harsh, remained steady and enduring. As he lay down, Thomas allowed his thoughts to drift. The sun would rise again, and the cycle of toil would continue, but for now, there was rest. Memories of the day lingered, the rich scent of tilled soil, the low murmur of fellow villagers, the soft laughter of his children. These moments, fleeting yet precious, reminded him of the humanity embedded in even the simplest lives, shaped as they were by labor, duty, and fleeting joys. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the distant cry of an owl punctuated the quiet night. Thomas closed his eyes, imagining the fields under the soft light of dawn, the promise of a new day awaiting. Sleep came slowly but inevitably, carrying him into dreams where the burdens of the manor softened, and the world felt momentarily gentle and boundless. In this quiet hour, Thomas embodied the rhythm of his world: labor and rest, duty and reflection, struggle and fleeting contentment. A single day in the life of a serf might seem ordinary to an observer, yet within its cycles lay resilience, endurance, and a subtle, unspoken poetry. By living it fully, Thomas connected to the land, to his family, and to a lineage of humans who had endured, adapted, and found meaning even in constraint. The first light of morning filtered softly through the gaps in the cottage walls, casting long shadows across the straw-strewn floor. Thomas stirred awake, muscles still sore from yesterday's labor. He paused for a moment, savoring the fragile quiet before the world demanded action. Outside, the village was just beginning to stir, the distant clatter of buckets, lowing of cows, and birdsong signaling another day of toil. Rising slowly, Thomas stepped onto the cool floor, feeling the chill of dawn against his skin. He washed his face in the basin of water left from the night before, the cold shocking him awake. Each day began this way, a ritual that sharpened the senses and reminded him that, despite the weariness that clung to his body, life demanded vigilance, effort, and resilience. He dressed quickly in his homespun tunic and boots, worn and patched from countless seasons of labor. Today would be no different from the day before, yet there was an unspoken rhythm to this monotony that grounded him. Each task had a purpose, however small it seemed: the plowing of fields, the tending of animals, and the repairing of structures, all acts of survival intertwined with the unbroken cycles of the manor. Before leaving, Thomas paused by the window, gazing at the fields bathed in soft morning light. He wondered how many generations had walked these same paths, tilled this same soil, and tended the same animals. There was a strange comfort in the continuity, a sense that even in his constrained life, he was part of something larger, enduring beyond the individual struggles of a single day. Stepping outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and smoke from distant hearths. The village slowly came to life. Neighbors emerged from cottages, greeting each other with nods and soft murmurs. Children chased chickens, their laughter echoing in the quiet lanes. Though life was harsh, there were moments of shared joy and fleeting freedom, and Thomas relished these small glimpses of vitality before the work claimed him again. He moved to the fields with the other men, the wooden plow strapped to his shoulder heavier than it seemed. The soil was stubborn, resisting each furrow, and the morning dew made the earth slick beneath his boots. Sweat would soon stain his tunic, hands blister, and muscles ache, but Thomas embraced the labor as both duty and necessity. The physical exertion offered clarity, a focus that quieted the wandering thoughts and anchored him in the present. As he worked, Thomas reflected on his life and the burdens of serfdom. The lord of the manor held immense power, controlling the harvest, the land, and, by extension, the villagers themselves. There was little room for complaint or resistance, yet within these constraints, Thomas found dignity. Completing each task, tending the soil, and caring for his family were acts of quiet defiance. Proof that his life mattered even if history rarely remembered names like his. Around him, the rhythm of the village was steady and enduring. Oxen pulled plows with mechanical patience, women gathered water and eggs, and children chased one another through the morning light. Each movement, no matter how small, contributed to the intricate balance of survival. Thomas admired this unspoken harmony, the shared knowledge that every hand had a role and every effort, though unseen by the Lord, was indispensable. Mid-morning brought a pause to rest and eat. Thomas sat beneath a tree, breaking bread and savoring the cheese he had saved. His fellow workers gathered around, sharing minimal conversation but abundant understanding. Words were scarce. Glances, gestures, and the shared toil conveyed more than speech ever could. In these brief moments, Thomas felt a sense of belonging, a reminder that even in servitude, community could offer solace. After the short meal, he returned to the tasks at hand, repairing fences, clearing weeds, and tending the small orchard at the field's edge. Each strike of the hammer or turn of the spade was precise, mindful, and infused with a quiet dignity. Labor was never merely physical. It was a statement of resilience, a testament to the continuity of life despite the hardships imposed by circumstance and authority. By midday, Thomas's thoughts wandered beyond the immediate tasks. He contemplated the cycles of birth, labor, and death he witnessed daily. The children's laughter, the animals' care, the changing seasons, all were markers of time passing inexorably. He wondered what future awaited them, if the burdens of serfdom would persist or if one day, generations hence, freedom might feel attainable. These reflections brought a weight as heavy as any plow, yet they also nurtured a sense of purpose. As the sun reached its zenith, the heat pressed heavily on the village, and Thomas felt sweat soaking through his tunic. The fields required relentless attention. Weeds grew stubbornly among the crops, and irrigation channels needed clearing. Every movement was deliberate, each task a small battle against the relentless demands of nature and time. Yet in this labor, Thomas found a rhythm that both exhausted and grounded him. Nearby, villagers moved with similar intent, their expressions etched with concentration and resolve. Mary tended her herb garden, carefully plucking leaves while humming softly. Children carried small loads of water, mimicking the adults, learning the routines that would define their lives. Thomas observed them, recognizing the continuity of generations, each life intertwined with the land, with the manor, and with one another. By mid-afternoon, Thomas guided the oxen to pull a plow through the hardest section of soil. The ground resisted with stubborn tenacity, but he matched its struggle with steady determination. Every furrow he cut was a small triumph, tangible proof of effort, and a connection to the cycles that sustained the village. The physical strain pressed upon him, yet also brought clarity, a meditative focus amid the unyielding rhythm of the workday. The steward passed through the fields, inspecting the progress with a critical eye. Thomas bowed respectfully, acknowledging authority while keeping his thoughts inward, focused on the tasks at hand. The power of the manor weighed heavily on all serfs, yet Thomas had learned to navigate it with quiet diligence. Each day's survival depended on vigilance, endurance, and a subtle understanding of hierarchy and consequence. As the afternoon waned, Thomas moved to repair a broken fence that bordered the orchard. Hammering stakes into the earth, he worked methodically, aware of the animals that depended on secure enclosures. Livestock was more than sustenance. It was security and stability for the entire household. The responsibility pressed upon him, yet he took it with pride, knowing his careful hands contributed to the well-being of family and village alike. By late afternoon, the sun began its slow descent, painting the fields in shades of gold and amber. Thomas guided the last oxen back toward the barn, ensuring all were accounted for. Cattle lowed softly, chickens clucked as they returned to coops, and the distant sound of children playing drifted across the village. The day's work was nearly complete, each task a testament to human endurance and the unbroken cycles of rural life. Returning to the cottage, Thomas removed his boots and hung his tools with care, the act of order bringing a small comfort. Eleanor called him to help with the evening meal, a simple stew of vegetables and a small portion of bread. They shared the food quietly, savoring each bite while listening to the murmur of neighbors through the thin walls. Moments like this, though humble, carried a profound sense of home and continuity. As twilight deepened, Thomas tended the children, helping them wash and preparing them for sleep. He whispered words of reassurance and joined in the brief prayers that tied their lives to something beyond the village, a small spiritual anchor amid the physical demands of existence. When the children were asleep, he and Eleanor lingered by the fire, sharing quiet conversation and the comfort of presence. Finally, Thomas lay on his straw-filled mattress, the day's fatigue pressing down, but with a sense of accomplishment. Each task completed, each responsibility met, reinforced the continuity of life and the endurance of those bound to the land. Outside, the night wind rustled through the trees, and the distant cry of an owl punctuated the quiet. Thomas closed his eyes, letting sleep reclaim him, knowing the cycle would begin anew at dawn, and that within this repetition lay the quiet dignity of survival. The morning air carried a gentle chill as Thomas stepped outside, the dew still clinging to grass and thatched roofs. Today, a few villagers planned to visit the nearby market, a rare occasion to exchange goods and gather news. Thomas lingered, considering whether he could spare a small bundle of eggs and a bit of cheese to trade, knowing that even minor interactions could brighten an otherwise relentless routine. He set off toward the village square, passing neighbors already engaged in their chores. Mary called out a greeting, her hands dusted with soil from tending herbs. Children ran ahead, laughing as they chased each other through puddles left by last night's rain. The familiarity of these routines carried warmth, a gentle rhythm threading together the lives of villagers despite the hardships imposed by the manor. At the square, a small cluster of villagers had gathered near the well, exchanging news of the manor and distant happenings. Gossip traveled quickly here: who had repaired a roof, which cow had calved, or rumors of the steward's latest decrees. Thomas listened quietly, absorbing details that might influence the day's work or offer insight into changes within the manor. Knowledge, even trivial, held value in this tightly woven community. The market itself was modest but lively. A few traveling merchants offered fabrics, tools, and spices that smelled faintly exotic. Thomas examined a bundle of herbs for tea and a small piece of iron to mend a broken tool. The exchange was cautious and measured. Every coin spent required careful thought. Yet the small indulgence of purchasing a rare spice felt luxurious, a brief escape from the ordinary demands of his life. Among the villagers, children scurried between stalls, wide-eyed at bright colors and curious objects. Their laughter echoed against the wooden stalls, mingling with the clatter of wagons and the lowing of animals tethered nearby. Thomas smiled at the energy, recognizing the innocence he once carried. Even in servitude, moments like these reminded him of the world beyond toil, of joys that could not be plowed or measured but were no less essential. After completing small trades, Thomas returned toward the fields, carrying his modest purchases. He encountered the blacksmith, hammering sparks into the morning air as he shaped a horseshoe. A brief nod and exchanged words of gratitude acknowledged mutual dependence. The blacksmith relied on villagers' work as much as they relied on his craft. These connections, subtle yet vital, created a fragile web sustaining daily life. Back in the fields, Thomas resumed his work with a renewed sense of purpose. The sunlight now warmed the earth, drying dew and softening soil for plowing. Each furrow he cut was deliberate, each swing of the spade precise. Yet his mind drifted to small plans. Perhaps a visit to the orchard later to inspect apples, or a short walk to the river for a rare swim before the sun sank. These small imaginings brought lightness to labor, weaving brief hope into a life dictated by necessity. Midday brought an impromptu communal meal. Villagers shared bread, cheese, and small portions of stew, trading recipes, laughter, and stories of past seasons. Thomas savored these moments. Though simple, they reminded him of the human spirit's resilience. Even amidst unending labor and hardship, people found ways to celebrate small victories, to connect, and to find meaning in routine. After the meal, Thomas visited the orchard. The trees stretched tall and gnarled, their branches heavy with fruit. He plucked a small apple, brushing dirt from its skin, and tasted its sweetness. Moments like these, private and fleeting, offered reminders that life held pleasures not measured in labor or obligation. Even a serf could find ownership in a personal experience, a brief rebellion against the demands of a world that constrained him. Returning to his cottage as shadows lengthened, Thomas carried the day's small rewards: herbs, fruit, and minor goods for his family. Eleanor greeted him with a smile, and the children rushed forward, eager to inspect the treasures of the day. The shared delight in these simple items strengthened bonds, bringing warmth and laughter to a life often defined by hardship. Evening fell, painting the village in muted shades of gold and violet. Thomas tended the animals, ensuring each was fed and secure. The oxen huddled, the chickens nestled, and the pigs settled in their pen. Each act of care was a link in the chain sustaining life, a responsibility that, though physically demanding, carried intangible satisfaction. In these final moments of daylight, he found solace in duty completed and life maintained. As night approached, the village settled into quiet patterns. The sounds of wind through the trees, distant laughter, and the occasional lowing of animals blended into a lullaby of rural life. Thomas joined his family near the hearth, sharing the evening meal and recounting details of the day. Conversation was soft, punctuated by small laughter and gentle teasing. Here, the labor of the day yielded to warmth, connection, and reflection. Finally, Thomas lay on his straw-filled mattress, the day's exertion pressing into every muscle. He closed his eyes, recalling the orchard, the laughter of children, and the subtle triumphs of small trades. Sleep came gradually, carrying him away from toil into dreams where the hardships softened, and the world appeared full of possibility, however fleeting. Another day would come with the sun, yet within the cycles of labor and rest, Thomas found a fragile, enduring dignity. The morning air was crisp as Thomas stepped outside, expecting the familiar rhythm of daily labor. But today, the fields held an unexpected challenge. Overnight rain had turned the soil into thick, clinging mud. Every step was a struggle, and plowing became a grueling test of strength. Thomas cursed quietly under his breath, aware that these conditions would slow the day's work and strain his already aching muscles. As he pressed on, he noticed a small group of villagers gathered near the barn, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Curiosity mingled with concern as he approached. A cow had gone lame overnight, its legs swollen and painful. The responsibility of tending livestock, already heavy, now carried an added urgency. Thomas knew that without proper care, the animal's health and the family's sustenance would be at risk. With the help of Mary and a few other villagers, Thomas guided the injured cow into the barn. They worked carefully, murmuring soothing words to calm the frightened animal. Thomas inspected the leg, recognizing a deep bruise likely caused by slipping in the wet yard. There was no time to summon the Lord's veterinarian, so he improvised a splint from wooden stakes and cloth, doing everything he could to relieve the cow's pain. By mid-morning, the village felt a subtle tension, a shared awareness that labor would be slower and heavier than usual. Thomas returned to the fields, mud clinging to boots and tunic, each plowstroke requiring doubled effort. Despite the frustration, there was camaraderie among the workers. They joked quietly about slipping in the muck and trading advice, their spirits resilient even under added strain. Unexpectedly, a commotion arose near the manor. The steward had discovered a broken fence along the eastern boundary, one that threatened to allow livestock into the Lord's wheat fields. Villagers were summoned to assist in emergency repairs. Thomas joined the group, carrying heavy stakes and hammering into the damp soil. Sweat mingled with rain-soaked grime, and the day's routine felt utterly transformed by these sudden demands. While repairing the fence, Thomas reflected on how fragile their world could be. A small lapse, a minor accident, or a moment of carelessness could ripple across the village, affecting food, income, and the welfare of families. The Lord's presence added weight, a silent authority observing every action. Even the smallest misstep might be punished, and yet the villagers persevered, bound by necessity and resilience. After hours of grueling labor, the fence stood firm. Thomas wiped mud from his brow and gazed across the fields. The sun broke through clouds, casting dappled light on the freshly plowed rows. The challenge had been exhausting, yet overcoming it brought a quiet satisfaction. Each villager had contributed to a shared victory, small yet significant. in a life often defined by monotony and hardship. Returning to the barn, Thomas checked the cow's leg again. The splint held, and the animal seemed calmer. Relief washed over him. This simple success reminded him that skill, patience, and care could shape outcomes in a world largely beyond his control. Even minor triumphs were worthy of quiet pride, offering a sense of agency in a life so constrained by social and natural forces. By late afternoon, the sun softened, and the day's unexpected trials had left villagers tired but resilient. Thomas guided oxen back to the barn, cleaned tools, and surveyed the fields. There was a new awareness of vulnerability, yet also a sense of capability. The day's obstacles had been met and overcome. Challenges did not diminish life. They revealed strength hidden beneath the routine. Evening descended slowly. Thomas returned to the cottage, boots caked with mud and clothes damp from rain. Eleanor greeted him with concern, helping him remove layers of grime. The children sat nearby, curious about the day's events, and Thomas recounted his efforts with gentle humor. Laughter, small but genuine, eased the tension of the day and reminded the family of resilience and togetherness. After the evening meal, Thomas tended animals one final time. The barn smelled faintly of hay and manure, earthy and comforting. He ensured each creature was secure, reflecting that the smallest acts of care were a form of quiet heroism. These moments, unnoticed by the manor's authority, were the threads sustaining life and community, a reminder that dignity often resides in responsibility fulfilled. As night fell, Thomas lay on his straw mattress, muscles weary yet satisfied. The trials of the day lingered in memory: the mud, the broken fence, the injured cow. But so did the quiet victories. Outside, the village settled into soft murmurs and distant owl calls. Sleep came slowly, carrying him into dreams where challenges softened, strength endured, and the world felt a touch more manageable, even within the relentless cycles of serfdom. The morning sun rose lazily over the village, casting long shadows across the cobblestone lanes. Thomas stepped outside, noting the familiar bustle of daily life: children chasing chickens, women carrying water, and men preparing for a day in the fields. Yet today carried a subtle weight. The Lord Steward had announced a brief inspection of crops, livestock, and cottages. Even minor details would now draw attention. Thomas greeted neighbors with a nod, exchanging whispered updates about repairs, harvests, and the morning chores. Social bonds among villagers were fragile yet vital, woven through shared labor, small favors, and communal support. A borrowed tool or a word of advice could ripple across the village, maintaining not only efficiency but also trust and mutual reliance. He approached the fields with renewed focus, aware that the steward's gaze would fall upon him soon. Each furrow, each carefully tended animal, became a measure of diligence. While the Lord and Steward dictated the broader rules of life, these small actions allowed Thomas and others to assert competence, responsibility, and quiet pride within constrained circumstances. Mid-morning, a brief encounter with the steward occurred. He walked among the villagers, inspecting fences, plows, and livestock. Thomas greeted him respectfully, careful to maintain posture and composure. Words were minimal, but the interaction carried significance. Acknowledgement of authority balanced with the subtle assertion of capability through careful work. These encounters reminded villagers of their position, yet also offered a stage to demonstrate skill and reliability. After the inspection, Thomas returned to his family, carrying baskets of vegetables for the evening meal. Eleanor greeted him with a faint smile, noting the added weight of the day's provisions. Children ran ahead, laughter brightening the early afternoon. Thomas paused to appreciate these fleeting moments. Life's endurance often manifested not in grand events but in these quiet exchanges of care, attention, and affection. By midday, villagers gathered briefly in the square to discuss communal matters, repairing a section of the road, coordinating the next week's harvest, or assisting a neighbor whose roof had begun to leak. Thomas contributed where he could, offering labor and advice, reinforcing the interconnectedness that sustained their small society. Even minor contributions strengthened the village fabric, fostering bonds that would endure beyond a single season. Afternoon brought more labor in the fields. Thomas guided oxen along furrows, noting the stubborn patches of soil resisting their weight. The sweat on his brow mirrored the effort of neighbors, Yet conversation and shared laughter lightened the strain. Stories were exchanged of distant relatives, seasonal superstitions, and minor triumphs. Humor, even amid exhaustion, functioned as a balm for collective hardship. Later, he visited the barn, checking on livestock and attending to minor injuries. Each action, though repetitive, carried significance. The animals were sustenance, security, and a source of stability for families dependent on them. By tending to them with care, Thomas exercised agency in a life often dictated by external authority, finding dignity and responsibility quietly observed by those around him. As evening approached, Thomas gathered with neighbors near the communal fire to share brief news and laughter. These gatherings, small and informal, reinforced social cohesion. Stories of past harvests, humorous mishaps, and distant travels created a sense of belonging. Though hierarchy dominated much of their lives, these moments allowed villagers to reclaim a measure of autonomy through fellowship and shared humanity. Returning home, Thomas assisted Eleanor in preparing the evening meal, a simple stew with bread and herbs. Conversation was soft and reflective. The family discussed the day, exchanged advice, and remarked on the children's minor victories and curiosities. Even in a constrained life, these interactions sustained emotional well-being, providing respite from the relentless cycle of labor imposed by the manor. Night fell, casting the village in muted shadows. Thomas checked the animals one final time, ensuring each was secure, then settled by the hearth. Firelight danced across the walls, illuminating the lines of fatigue and endurance on his face. He reflected on the day's labor, the inspection, and the communal interactions, moments both burdensome and rewarding, shaping his understanding of duty, resilience, and connection. Finally, Thomas lay on his straw-stuffed mattress, muscles weary yet mind alive with reflection. He considered the subtle hierarchies that governed life, the interdependence of villagers, and the resilience required to navigate a world dictated by authority and necessity. Sleep came gradually, carrying him into dreams where duty softened, bonds endured, and even a constrained life contained threads of dignity and quiet fulfillment. The morning air carried a faint chill, hinting at the approaching change of season. Thomas stepped outside, observing the subtle shifts in the village landscape, leaves beginning to turn golden, the soil slightly harder, and the scent of smoke from hearths mingling with the crisp air. Seasonal tasks now dictated his day, from harvesting late crops to preparing barns for the colder months. He began by checking the small orchard at the edge of the fields. Apples and pears hung heavy on branches, their colors vibrant against the soft light of morning. Thomas carefully plucked fruit, inspecting for rot or insect damage. Each piece represented both sustenance and potential trade at the village market, a tangible reward for careful labor. The orchard demanded attention, for failure meant less food and fewer resources for his family. Neighbors emerged with baskets and tools, preparing for collective tasks. The village shared labor to accomplish what one household alone could not manage. Fences needed reinforcement, barns required minor repairs, and herbs had to be harvested and dried. Thomas joined these efforts, finding solace in the shared rhythm of work, laughter, and occasional teasing that lightened the burden of the season's demands. Mid-morning brought the ringing of the church bell, summoning villagers for prayer and reflection. Though Thomas's life was defined by physical labor, the spiritual observances offered a pause, a reminder of forces greater than toil and harvest. Families gathered in the small stone chapel, lighting candles, kneeling on hard floors, and whispering prayers for health, protection, and a fruitful season. The ritual carried a collective weight, binding community and faith together. After the service, conversation drifted to the changing seasons. Elderly villagers shared memories of harsh winters past and advice for storing grain, preserving meat, and tending animals. Thomas listened attentively, absorbing practical knowledge handed down through generations. These oral traditions, woven with small stories and warnings, were essential for survival, connecting him to those who had navigated the cycles of life before him. Back in the fields, the sun climbed higher. Thomas guided oxen through rows of late crops, the earth dry in some spots and stubbornly damp in others. Sweat ran down his face, mixing with dust and soil. The day demanded endurance, but there was satisfaction in the tangible results of labor. neatly plowed rows, harvested fruits, and secure fences. Every task completed strengthened the invisible web holding village life together. By afternoon, Thomas and other villagers gathered to prepare communal preserves for winter. Apples were peeled and sliced, herbs bundled and hung to dry, and small portions of vegetables stored in clay jars. These preparations required careful planning and meticulous effort, yet they also created moments of shared storytelling, laughter, and teaching. Children participated under watchful eyes, learning the skills necessary for survival and continuity. As the day waned, Thomas paused at the well to draw water, observing the quiet life around him. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, oxen rested, and neighbors finished small chores. Even amidst toil, there was beauty in these routines, a rhythm that connected past and present, labor and reward, human effort and natural cycles. The village, though constrained by hierarchy, thrived through cooperation and shared purpose. Evening brought a subtle sense of celebration. A small harvest ritual was observed, a modest feast of bread, stew, and freshly gathered fruit. Candles flickered in the windows, casting warm light on smiling faces. Elders offered blessings for the fields, the animals, and the families. Thomas savored the simple meal, appreciating both its sustenance and the communal bonds it represented. In these moments, hardships felt less burdensome, replaced by shared gratitude and quiet joy. After supper, Thomas tended the animals one final time. The cows lowed softly, chickens nestled, and pigs settled into straw-lined pens. Each act of care was a continuation of the cycle: labor feeding survival, survival nurturing community, and community sustaining hope. The rhythms of the village were unbroken, a delicate balance that required diligence, patience, and mutual respect. Finally, Thomas returned to his cottage. Eleanor greeted him, warmth and familiarity in her expression. Children were already asleep, dreaming after a day full of chores and minor adventures. Thomas sat by the hearth, reflecting on the day, the tasks accomplished, and the subtle victories embedded in seasonal labor. Even in constraint, there was beauty, resilience, and a quiet dignity in sustaining life through effort and care. As night fell, he lay down to sleep on his straw mattress, muscles tired but mind reflective. The scent of dried herbs, the warmth of the hearth, and the distant sounds of the village lulled him into a deep slumber. Tomorrow would bring more labor, challenges, and moments of connection. Yet Thomas knew that within the cycles of seasons, toil, and quiet rituals, life carried a profound sense of purpose and continuity. The week's labor had been long and taxing, but a sense of relief hung in the air. Thomas emerged at dawn, noticing the soft glow of sunlight on dewy fields. The villagers moved with purpose, yet there was an underlying lightness, a subtle anticipation of the small celebrations that marked the end of a demanding week. Even serfs found moments to savor life beyond toil. Thomas greeted neighbors warmly, exchanging nods and brief updates. Children scampered ahead, their laughter a cheerful counterpoint to the morning's heavy work. Today, tasks were lighter. Fences already mended, fields cleared, and animals tended. The focus shifted to preparation for the communal gathering that would mark the week's close. A modest feast, a chance to share food, stories, and laughter. He assisted Eleanor in gathering vegetables and eggs for the evening meal. Baskets were heavy, but shared effort lightened the burden. Other villagers brought dairy, freshly baked bread, and preserved fruits. Each contribution, though humble, strengthened the social fabric, demonstrating that collective preparation, even for small celebrations, fostered connection and pride. By midday, the village square buzzed with quiet excitement. Women hung herbs to dry, children played near stacks of wood, and men carried firewood for the evening hearths. Thomas paused, observing this subtle coordination and shared understanding. A week of hardship gave way to moments of communal enjoyment. Small rituals, laughter, and cooperation reminded them all of resilience and mutual dependence. As the sun reached its peak, the steward's presence was felt more keenly. Even during minor festivities, hierarchy lingered as a quiet backdrop. Yet villagers navigated this tension with care, respectful acknowledgement paired with discreet joy. Thomas nodded to the steward while continuing his tasks, mindful of authority but also aware that these moments offered respite and connection that softened the week's toil. Afternoon brought preparation for the modest feast. Thomas and others built a fire near the square, cooking simple stews and roasting vegetables. Children collected fallen apples and nuts, their small hands and energetic curiosity contributing meaningfully. Laughter and stories wove through the air, connecting past lessons, seasonal knowledge, and shared experiences into a tapestry of community life. Thomas observed neighbors exchanging advice on crop rotation, herbal remedies, and minor repairs. Knowledge, passed orally and practically, was a vital resource. Elders recounted tales of harsh winters survived and festivals enjoyed, reminding all of the cyclical nature of life and the strength embedded in tradition. Even in servitude, shared wisdom provided autonomy and resilience. By late afternoon, the feast commenced. Villagers gathered around simple tables, sharing food, music, and laughter. Thomas sat with his family, passing bread and vegetables while recounting stories of the week's labor. The children's eyes sparkled with delight at minor indulgences, fresh fruit, warm bread, or a small portion of cheese. These moments, though fleeting, embodied the subtle joys often hidden beneath relentless toil. As evening descended, the firelight flickered across the village, illuminating tired but content faces. Songs rose softly, accompanied by simple instruments, and the village joined in communal chants and prayers. Thomas felt a profound sense of belonging. Despite hierarchical constraints, laborious routines, and occasional misfortune, the community endured together, finding joy, resilience, and identity within shared experience. After the feast, Thomas tended animals one final time. The cows, chickens, and pigs were secure, their needs met. Even the simplest acts of care carried dignity, reinforcing the invisible thread sustaining life. Each action, small yet vital, reminded Thomas that responsibility, diligence, and attention to detail defined both survival and honor in the constrained life of a serf. Night settled over the village, quiet except for the soft murmur of conversation and the distant call of an owl. Thomas returned home, removing mud-stained boots and setting tools aside. Eleanor welcomed him with a warm smile. The children, exhausted from play and the day's excitement, slept soundly. Thomas allowed himself to linger by the hearth, reflecting on the week's labors, minor triumphs, and the bonds of community that had grown stronger through shared effort. Finally, Thomas lay down on his straw mattress, body fatigued but spirit nourished. The week's trials, the unexpected events, and the small celebrations had left him aware of the intricate balance between toil and respite, authority and community, labor and fleeting joy. Sleep claimed him slowly, carrying him into dreams where endurance, dignity, and continuity intertwined with hope and quiet satisfaction. The morning dawned with an uneasy stillness. Thomas stepped outside, noticing that the village seemed quieter than usual. A message had arrived from the manor. A wagon of supplies would arrive unexpectedly, and the steward demanded immediate assistance from all able villagers. Though mundane routines had been established, today's tasks would be different, urgent, and unyielding. Thomas quickly gathered tools and prepared for labor beyond the usual rhythm. Neighbors hurried alongside him, exchanging terse but determined words. The wagon was to be unloaded, supplies organized, and damaged sacks repaired. Each action required precision and speed, for failure could incur the Lord's displeasure. The usual slow cadence of village life was replaced by urgency and shared tension. When the wagon arrived, oxen creaked under the weight of barrels and crates. Thomas coordinated with other men, securing ropes and carefully lifting the heaviest loads. The sun climbed higher, and sweat ran freely down his face, soaking the homespun tunic. Yet even in this rush, a quiet order emerged. Each villager moved with practiced efficiency, their roles defined by experience and necessity. Halfway through the unloading, a mishap occurred. One barrel of grain tipped dangerously, threatening to spill across the cobblestones. Thomas lunged, steadying it with all his strength while a neighbor helped secure it. The danger passed, but hearts pounded. Even minor accidents carried weight in a village governed by the manor, where errors could lead to punishment or lost resources. Thomas allowed himself a brief, grateful breath. Once the supplies were secured, Thomas assisted in repairing torn sacks and stacking crates neatly. Each task, though repetitive, demanded attention. The steward inspected their work, nodding with approval at the meticulous organization. These moments reminded Thomas that diligence could shape outcomes, even under authority, and that competence, however quiet, earned respect and reduced the risk of retribution. By mid-afternoon, the village returned to a semblance of rhythm, yet the incident lingered in Thomas's mind. Even within a life of routine, unpredictability could intrude, testing patience, skill, and endurance. He reflected on the delicate balance between labor, hierarchy, and survival, realizing that adaptability was as crucial as strength or diligence. During a brief respite, Thomas walked to the small orchard at the edge of the fields. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and ripe fruit tempted him. He plucked a few apples, feeling the simple satisfaction of small, tangible rewards amidst the pressure. These fleeting moments reminded him that even in constrained life, sensory joys and private victories remain possible. The evening brought another unexpected turn. A neighbor's child had fallen while chasing a chicken, scraping their arm badly. Thomas and Eleanor hurried to provide first aid, cleaning the wound with water and herbs. The child's tears and fear softened under their care, highlighting the fragile intersection of work, family, and community. Even amidst toil and hierarchy, compassion remained essential. As night descended, Thomas returned home, exhausted but fulfilled. The day's challenges had tested him in ways both physical and emotional. Yet he had navigated each obstacle with care and resilience. Eleanor greeted him warmly, helping remove dirt-streaked clothes, and the children clung sleepily to her skirts. The household, though weary, remained intact, a sanctuary within a world of demands. By the hearth, Thomas reflected on the day's events. Unpredictability was inevitable, yet each challenge carried lessons in responsibility, patience, and collaboration. The unexpected wagon, the tipped barrel, the child's injury, all illustrated the fragile balance of life under the manor. Each moment of care, vigilance, and effort maintained continuity, connection, and dignity, even when circumstances felt beyond control. Finally, Thomas lay down on his straw mattress, body heavy with fatigue yet mind alive with reflection. The village slept around him, animals secured, children dreaming, and neighbors resting from their labors. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying both the scent of earth and the promise of tomorrow. Sleep claimed him, drawing him into dreams where challenges softened, bonds endured, and life, though constrained, retained its quiet, persistent poetry. The morning air was crisp, carrying a hint of frost as Thomas stepped outside. A week of labor and unexpected trials had left the village weary, yet there was a quiet satisfaction in routine restored. Today, his tasks were familiar: tending animals, checking fences, and preparing small plots for planting. Even the ordinary demanded care, but repetition offered a comforting rhythm, steadying both body and mind. As he moved through the fields, Thomas reflected on the nature of his existence. Life as a serf was bound by duty, obligation, and the manor's authority. Yet within these constraints, moments of autonomy existed. Every careful plow, repaired fence, and nurtured animal was a small assertion of control, a declaration that even within servitude, effort had meaning and dignity. Children's laughter drifted from the village square. Thomas paused, observing them chase chickens and tumble through the dewy grass. Their joy reminded him of the resilience of the human spirit. Even in a world defined by labor and hierarchy, the simple pleasures of childhood persisted, offering hope that life's hardships could coexist with moments of beauty, learning, and play. Mid-morning brought neighbors together for minor repairs and shared tasks. Thomas lent his strength where needed, his hands calloused yet precise. Conversation was sparse but meaningful, sharing advice, warnings about crops, and anecdotes of the manor's subtle shifts. These interactions, though understated, reinforced bonds that carried the village through each season, each unexpected challenge, and each day of unrelenting work. After tending animals and checking crops, Thomas paused beneath the tree at the orchard's edge. Apples and pears glowed in the soft sunlight. He plucked one, brushing it clean and savoring the crisp sweetness. Simple acts like this carried profound significance. They symbolized continuity, reward, and the quiet triumphs of life cultivated through patience and care. In a world that often ignored the individual, these moments affirmed existence. By midday, Thomas joined a communal meal. Neighbors shared bread, cheese, and stew, discussing tasks completed and plans for the week ahead. Laughter mingled with the hum of conversation, a counterpoint to the hard labor of earlier hours. These gatherings, small yet vital, nurtured resilience, offering shared strength to endure both the hardships of servitude and the unpredictability of daily life. Afternoon passed with gentle work in the fields. Thomas guided oxen through soft earth, cleared debris, and tended fences with care. Each motion was deliberate, meditative, connecting body to land, effort to sustenance. Labor, though arduous, provided clarity and a sense of purpose. Within the repetitive cycle of toil, Thomas found space for reflection, subtle joy, and affirmation of his contribution to family and community alike. Evening approached, painting the village in gold and amber light. Thomas returned to the cottage, removing worn boots and setting aside tools. Eleanor greeted him with a quiet smile, and the children, their eyes bright with curiosity, awaited the recounting of the day. Meals were simple yet nourishing, conversations gentle, reflecting the balance between survival and care, labor and love. As twilight deepened, Thomas performed final checks on livestock in the small orchard. Each act of care, though minor, represented continuity and stewardship. The animals were secure, the crops tended, and the household prepared for nightfall. These responsibilities, completed faithfully, embodied dignity and purpose within a life often constrained by the demands of authority and circumstance. Finally, night enveloped the village. Thomas lay upon his straw mattress, body fatigued but mind reflective. He considered the week's trials, the small victories, the laughter of children, and the bonds of community. Life, though constrained, was not without meaning. Within routine, within labor, and within shared care, he found the quiet triumphs that gave his existence shape, depth, and dignity. Sleep arrived gradually, carrying Thomas into dreams where work softened, challenges resolved, and continuity endured. The cycles of the day, the week, and the seasons wove together into a tapestry of resilience and quiet joy. Even within the rigid bounds of serfdom, he recognized that life, though modest, was rich with purpose, human connection, and enduring strength. The sun had dipped low, painting the village in muted shades of gold and violet. Thomas stepped outside one last time, feeling the cool evening air against his skin. The day's labor was complete, the fields neat, animals secure, and the village settling into quiet rhythms. A sense of calm enveloped him, the familiar exhaustion tempered by the satisfaction of work well done. He walked slowly to the orchard, brushing his hand along the branches of trees heavy with fruit. Each apple and pear seemed to hold the memory of a season's care, the culmination of labor, patience, and attention. Thomas allowed himself a quiet smile, savoring the simple joys that had punctuated the day. A plowed row, a repaired fence, a neighbor's laugh, a child's delight. Returning to the cottage, he found Eleanor preparing a modest evening meal. The children clung sleepily to her skirts, still glowing from a day full of chores, play, and small adventures. Thomas joined them at the table, passing bread and vegetables, speaking softly of the day's minor victories and shared triumphs. Moments like these, humble yet profound, defined the quiet dignity of village life. After supper, Thomas tended the animals one final time, checking each pen and stall. The cows were lowing softly, chickens nestled, pigs settled. Each act of care, though routine, was a testament to responsibility and enduring commitment. Within these repeated gestures, he found meaning, proof that even a life governed by toil and hierarchy could contain purpose and quiet pride. By twilight, he sat beside the hearth, reflecting on the week, the challenges overcome, and the bonds that sustained him. Life as a serf was constrained, but within those boundaries existed resilience, connection, and fleeting moments of joy. He thought of the children, the neighbors, and the seasons that shaped them all, realizing that these interwoven lives created a tapestry more intricate than any authority could dictate. Finally, Thomas lay upon his straw-stuffed mattress, body weary yet mind at peace. The flickering candlelight danced across the walls of the cottage, echoing the rhythm of life itself: work, care, connection, reflection. Outside, the night deepened, the village quiet, and a gentle wind rustled the trees. In the cycles of labor and rest, Thomas found solace, endurance, and the enduring beauty of a life lived with purpose. As sleep claimed him, he closed his eyes with a sense of completion. The day had ended, the week had passed, and the seasons continued their unceasing flow. Yet within that continuity, there remained space for small triumphs, for love and care, for laughter and reflection. Thomas dreamed lightly, wrapped in the quiet dignity of survival, community, and the simple, enduring rhythm of life in medieval England.